Welcome everybody to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming. And we are here again with another guide to the Scarred Lands setting for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. And as you probably have ascertained by now, I'm a big fan of the Scarred Lands setting. It is up there as one of my favourite D&D worlds in which you can play and run your games. And it's been interesting, while I cannot take the credit for this, I've been noticing a hell of a lot of Scarred Lands content out there now. Maybe it's just because I've been looking for it. But if you do something as simple as type Scarred Lands into YouTube, probably not right now because you're watching me. Hello, Nicholas. If you do it, then you'll see there's actually quite a lot of videos out there about the Scarred Lands setting. So this isn't pioneering work that I'm doing right now. But also, there's a whole load of Scarred Lands books out there for 5th edition and for previous editions. And a lot of the work between 3rd edition and 5th edition that served to update the setting, update the system, has really drawn a lot of new players in and a lot of new interest to the Scarred Lands world. So I'm encouraging you, jump on that train. It's a really interesting world in which to play D&D, and I think your group will no doubt benefit from a change of scenery if they're not already playing there. But I'm not just here to tell you that Scarred Lands is good. I'm here to tell you about what is interesting about the Scarred Lands. And hello, Micah, in Arizona, in blue Arizona. I do hope you're well. I will... as a point of reference, while I'm remembering to do so, in fact, remember to share this video link on my social media, because I always forget to do this before I go live. It's very foolish of me. So here we go. You're now going to hear my thunderous typing, because touch typing there. It would have been had I not made a spelling error. There we go. And I recommend anyone who wants people to join in on this live stream to tweet about it, post about it on Facebook right now, because the more people involved, the merrier. Now, I've done that a bit later than I had anticipated, but here we go. Better late than never. So yes, we're here today to speak about the destruction of Mormo. And the reason I decided to focus on Mormo is one of my favorite titans. Also encouragement from my good friend, colleague, Travis Legg, who is a past master when it comes to the Scarred Lands setting and line developer for that game for Onyx Path Publishing. And before I really get into the destruction of Mormo and why it's an interesting story, and I know I've gone into, in brief, the effect the destruction of the Titans and, I guess, rending of the Titans has had on the world of Scarn, I also wanted to point you in the direction of another show that deals with Scarred Lands. And it's a show called The Lore You Know. And it's hosted by Jeremy Hochhalter and Sarah Stewart. And these are also authors who have contributed a great deal to the Scarred Lands world, as well as other Dungeons & Dragons products. Sarah, in fact, is one of the co-authors of one of the Scarred Lands novels. So please do check that out. I've linked it in the video description below. I've also linked in the description below where you can actually purchase Scarred Lands products. I don't get anything from that. I don't get royalties. I don't get, profit. I don't own Scarred Lands. I don't even directly work on Scarred Lands. So these videos are mostly to just grab your interest and hopefully entice you into the world. So where were we? The destruction of Mormo. Time for a story. So Mormo is arguably, or was, the most capricious of the Titans. On one hand, cruel, on one hand, chaotic, and utterly, I guess, consumed by whimsy when it came to the creation of her various destructive childer. And that is evidenced by how quickly she would just abandon them. Mormo was responsible for the creation of many different serpent races, including the Asathi, one of the player races in Scarred Lands, the various Gorgons, the Medusae, and Hags as well. I've actually described some of her epithets in the video description below, some of the names by which she is known, things like the Mother of Serpents, the Mother of Hags, and such. But by no means was Mormo a caring creator, or the kind of creator who would give her followers guidance in any meaningful way. She would create them as experiments, as a way to torment others, and then she would abandon them, leaving them to torment themselves or fall into long lives of iniquity and depravity. And that was the way of Mormo while she was a living Titan. Then came the Titans' War and the fall that followed. And during this war between Titans and gods, Mormo was essentially pinned in the bodies of great serpents so that the gods could essentially get their hands on her, because before then she was more of a, I guess, ethereal, metaphysical being. And so she was pinned into the body, a mass of serpents. And one of the gods, the god of, let's see, Vangal the Ravager, that's it, had to check there. Vangal the Ravager reached inside this great body of serpents and ripped her heart out. Now, the gods weren't foolish. They knew the kind of being Mormo was. They knew how destructive, how corrupting Mormo was. And therefore, they knew that by just destroying her, it would contaminate the people and the world all around where her body fell. After all, this was being evidenced increasingly during the Titans' War. Whenever the Titans fell, it completely corrupted the world around them. So they made efforts to spread her body far and wide across Skarn so that that kind of effect wouldn't be so intense and so polluting in one particular area. Unfortunately, when Vangal the Ravager tore her flesh asunder to reach her heart, the blood, the viscera, the gore that seeped out of her body contaminated the ground around her, the land around her. And while it didn't reach the people, it did reach the environment. And that environment was at one point known as the Broadreach Forest, a home to many creatures, many peoples, including elves, including dwarves, and until then had been a place largely sanctuary of peace, of nature. And following Mormo's rending, the Broadreach Forest became somewhere far worse. Where Mormo's blood pooled, the forest became foul and ended up becoming dubbed the Hornsaw Forest, which is how it is now in the Scarred Lands setting. The unicorns of the Broadreach Forest, which is part of what the forest was once known for, were mutated and maddened by the Titan's blood, and it turned them into the infamous now Hornsaw unicorns, from which the forest draws its name. Awful rampaging beasts dedicated to tearing through anyone that intrudes on their territory, although certainly they are prone to wandering off just to eviscerate the occasional humanoid. Dozens of serpent holds sprung up, largely populated by Asathi that still worship Mother Mormo, but not always. There's lots of intelligent creatures that believe in the creation that Mormo, I guess, fermented, even despite the fact that as a mother, as a creator, she was capricious and cruel and prone to just abandoning her children. The idea of just having the raw power of creation, none of the responsibility, appeals to the, I guess, malevolent mind that doesn't have to put much compassion and care into their projects. And I will interrupt briefly to say hello to the Echomancer and hello to Kenneth Williams watching. So in response to Mormo's corruption, the Broadreach elves, they gave up their souls to preserve the land, to preserve the forest. They merged with the trees in an attempt to heal the suffering land. And they succeeded to a degree. There's parts of the Hornsaw Forest that are utterly corrupt, where the trees, where the plant life will try to ensnare and rip someone apart, where all the berries that grow are toxic, where all of the bugs, all of the spiders are, well, either larger than normal or incredibly more venomous or poisonous than normal, depending on what they are. But some of that plant life was preserved because of the elves' sacrifice. The land did not fall completely to wrack and ruin. Unfortunately, the elves' sacrifice, while it preserved the parts of the Broadreach, well, formerly Broadreach Forest, it did not preserve the other people that lived there, namely the dwarves, who, for the last century or so, have fallen enslaved to a horde of necromancers that have moved in to take advantage of this corrupt land, this land that was corrupted by Mormo's viscera that has pooled and coagulated and subverted the world around them, making the Hornsaw Forest a place ripe for necromantic arts and foul alchemies. So these opportunistic necromancers from the city of Glivid Ortal are still pressing the people of the Broadreach into slavery and misery in the dungeons of their necropolis below the forest. So, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. But the reason I wanted to go into it is because the destruction of Mormo is one of these key events in the history of Scarred Lands, and not that long ago, that has completely changed the environment where she fell and the people related to it. And people still worship Mormo despite her disassembled state because of the effect her being has on the world around her. The Hornsaw Forest is a central location in the upcoming Dead Man's Rust campaign, which is going to be on Kickstarter soon. It's one of Onyx Path's upcoming Kickstarters, a book developed by Travis Legg, which looks fantastic. And I really wanted to give focus to that location and some of the participants in it, just to sort of whet your appetites as to, again, why is the Scarred Land scarred? What is it that affected the world in such a way? And hopefully you can kind of realize that playing in these areas, as playing in these regions as participants, as players, as GMs, really allows you a broad depth of interactivity with the environment in a way that a lot of campaign settings don't have. Somewhere just being oppressively hot or being incredibly cold or very dry, or just having to wade through a swamp and having to deal with the inhabitants of that swamp, or just delving into a dungeon, is fine. But what the Scarred Lands manages to do is make the environment part of its character, because it ties it so closely to its history. I mentioned in my previous video druids, for instance. There are druids that worship Mormo and the corrupt land that Mormo has left behind. And so what you're able to do with the Scarred Lands, in a similar way to Vampire the Masquerade, is you take your classes from D&D, and rather than just saying, I'm a druid, or I'm a fighter, or I'm a wizard, you essentially loop them in to the campaign history. The fact that you are this class tells you something about your character, more than I just like to swing an axe or I just revere nature. It means you have made a decision when it comes to the history of the world and your place and your beliefs in it, and how you wish to, well, I guess, subvert things to your own will. And I really like that. I think it makes Scarred Lands a really enthralling setting, and certainly I found that whenever I've ran it. In fact, I will be running a Scarred Lands game for Red Moon Role-Playing very soon, which hopefully you will check out. I've done one before called the Great Wilhelm Heist, which you can check out on Red Moon Role-Playing's channel, where the party were recruited by a fire rack dragon, and we'll get into the rack dragons in an upcoming video, to essentially get into the guts of a fallen titan and retrieve a powerful relic from inside. Well, this is going to take you a little into the Dead Man's Rust area, so I hope you'll look forward to that. But anyway, just wanted to cover that with you, just introduce you to the destruction of Mormo and how it affected the Scarred Lands. And as usual, I will open the floor to questions if anyone has any. And hello, Cecilia, who's just chimed in. Thank you very much for turning up for this live stream. And remember, you can ask me questions about Scarred Lands. You can ask me questions about any game. I am here with my channel, as ever, to interact with you. All druids blighters, says Micah. Not all druids, but that's a very good question, because the public perception of druids in the Scarred Lands is indeed that druids are not to be trusted, because a great many druids during the Divine War sided with the Titans being great deific entities associated more with nature, the environment, climate, abstract concepts, than gods that were more defined, and they were worshipped by clerics. So there are still druids that worship the Earth Mother, which is seen as more tolerable, but the vast majority of druids are still seen with some suspicion. And you can, while I don't think it's ever quite defined as such in the campaign setting in the player's guide, which I've linked below, you are likely to meet some hostility entering any part of the Scarred Lands, especially any urban part of the Scarred Lands, as a druid, just because of where your predecessors' allegiances lied, even if yours do not. Nicholas asks a Scarred Land question, a vampire question. Is there a Satan associated with death and the afterlife in Scarred Lands? Don't know about a Satan as such, but there's a Titan associated with death. Yes, well, you've got Titans and gods. You've got a god of death. Titans are more related to things to do with the environment. But what I will do, in fact, do I have it? I don't have it to hand, unfortunately, not in the room. But what I can do, Nicholas, if you, in fact, just type Mormo Scarred Lands into Google, you can actually find access to a decent wiki. I think it could do with more building, but a decent wiki that will show you all of the Titans and all of the deities in the Scarred Lands, and all of them have really interesting histories in the way they've interacted with the world. I do love a campaign setting with a well-maintained wiki because it shows the fans are invested, but do check it out, because I always love my gods of death and the dead as well. As for what's the Church of Cain's opinion on Thin Bloods, Church of Cain are in Cults of the Blood Gods, which just went out to backers as of yesterday and has been received very well. Thank you very much. I think while individual members of the Church of Cain may think Thin Bloods aren't worth their spit, I think they are keen enough to have lay worshippers, doormen, and other such low-level acolytes. They would reach out to the Thin Bloods. The Church of Cain is, much like many religions, somewhat mercenary when it comes to their congregation. They will, they'll snatch anyone. It's the old sort of Catholic dogma, we'll take anybody. But I don't think they have any kind of orthodox view on whether Thin Bloods are heretical or whether they are in some way blessed. I think they will take them, and then through time they will probably judge them based on their merits. And if they offer no merits, they'll be treated more lowly than a full-blooded vampire who has also treated poorly just because of who they are. It's unfortunate, but I think that would be the case. That's my view. I think if a Thin Blood joins and shows enough aptitude and enough belief in the Gnosticism that the Church of Cain holds dear, they're not going to treat that person like they're some kind of anathema. Certainly. Dustin says, I wish you would do a video about the Morbus clan. I do link my Patreon below, Dustin. I am always happy to do more Vampire Clan videos if there is someone willing to back my Patreon and request them. Micah says, does Scarlands give the landscape NPC characteristics, or how does the setting incorporate the environment into the gameplay? That is a very good question. And in fact, you see some of that in Frostlands of Fenrilic, which is on the Silurician Vault right now, and also in the upcoming Dead Man's Rust with the Hornsaw Forest and with the Continent of Fenrilic, where the environment plays an active NPC part in the game, in that it can have environmental effects on your characters, but it can also bolster NPCs and monsters depending on where they are. There are creatures that are specifically tied to particular areas, and not in any kind of dull and restrictive way, but in ways that empower them. And I really like that. It's something I often compare Scarlands in my head to Vampire in a lot of ways, and that's probably because I run the two in a quite a similar way, in that and you see this a little in Chicago by Night too, that there are certain parts of a city, for instance, that favor certain clans. You might find it easier to feed, you might find it easier to hunt, you might find it easier to find contacts and so on. If, to use a very lazy example, you are a Malkavian working in some kind of mental hospital. But I think you've got a similar thing going on with Scarlands. In fact, I know you have. And I think that's really good. I love a world that actually feels, well, a world and a system that actually ties together. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, check out Frostlands of Fenrilic. I ordered my copy not that long ago and recently received it, and I really recommend it. It's a lot of fun. I think I've linked that one below as well. So one more question. AJ Grund, completely random, but favorite morph and or faction in Eclipse Phase? Good question, AJ. I'm a big fan of the Morning Star constellation. I have a lot of fun with them, and I love the setting of Venus. I ran more games set on Venus and in the clouds of Venus than anywhere else for Eclipse Phase. I tend to go more sunward than rimward. But my favorite morph, it's easy to say octomorphs, isn't it? Because who doesn't love playing some kind of octopus, really? But I'm also a big fan of, I'm trying to think of the one that I played recently. I played one of those morphs that is, it's like and I'm forgetting the name, a nanomorph maybe, which they're often seen with a certain amount of prejudice because of the Titans in Eclipse Phase, where you are essentially a swarm of nanobots. That was a lot of fun. That could make a shape of a face and interact with digital things. I like them. So yeah, having to straddle the line there, either octopus or nanobots. I could go either way. Anyway, hello Jacques and hello Dave. Thank you very much everyone for tuning in. Are there Titans on Eclipse Phase 2? There are, Nicholas, but very different Titans. These Titans are, one could say, AI evolved to the point of a great deal of homicidal intent. We'll do a video on Eclipse Phase at some point if someone decides to back the Patreon for that. I'd love to start talking about Eclipse Phase. Oh, what was the channel mentioned for the Scarlands game Matthew's running? That's Red Moon Role-Playing, Old Man Bane. So Red Moon Role-Playing, there's an old Scarlands actual play on there that I ran called The Great Wilhelm Heist. We have a new one coming up next week, which I'll be starting to run, which is based on the Dead Man's Rust campaign, which is going to be on Kickstarter next week. That's for the campaign book. But I'm going to be running some of it for the good folks at Red Moon Role-Playing too. So yeah, thank you very much everyone for watching. I do hope that's been a little bit interesting. And getting lots of questions now. Micah said, you mentioned something about the Dragon Coast in Forgotten Realms. I think I did a video on the Dragon Coast for the Forgotten Realms quite a while ago, a long time ago. So do check that out. It is my favorite part of the Forgotten Realms. So bye-bye for now, and see you again later this week.